In a recent video, I talked about how people who live rural lifestyles in low-density places where it's difficult to provide infrastructure and services efficiently, are able to do so because of the wealth that's created in central cities and shipped out to the hinterlands to pay for all of it. But it's fair to ask whether that's universally true across the US. So today I'm looking at a new data set, the 2023 Gross Domestic Product by county from the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, and I'm calculating GDP per capita to figure out which counties produce more than their fair share. And there end up being some very surprising answers, including the county with the highest GDP per capita in the United States, and it's not particularly close. As always, I'll include a link to all the data down in the description because it is fun to play with. And for this, I used the data by county because I wanted to compare urban counties to rural ones, but the BEA does provide other ways to slice up the data. And I'm not going to get into a whole tedious explanation of how county-level GDP is calculated. The simple answer is that it's the value of goods and services produced by the county's economy, less the value of goods and services used up in their production. Again though, all the resources are linked down in the description, so go check it out if you want a deeper understanding. A quick note on the calculations that happened behind the scenes here. I had to merge tables from the BEA and the US Census, and that works really well for the vast majority of states that just have, counties. But it gets very tricky in states that decide to get creative, and I will talk about a couple of those later in the video, but mostly I'm talking about Virginia, which has cities that are independent from counties, and the BEA treats these very differently from the way the census does. So I basically just gave up and left Virginia out of the analysis I'm about to show you. So Virginia is for lovers, I guess, but it's definitely not for team players. So the way I decided to go with this is to find the highest GDP per capita county in each state, see if the result is consistent with my assumption that heavily urbanized counties are the economic powerhouses of the US, and see what kind of conclusions I could draw. And there ends up being quite a bit more variety in the kinds of counties that popped up than what I was expecting. So I'm gonna break this down by category. So this isn't a top 10 list, but probably something more interesting, so let's get into it. The first category is the one that I think is intuitively obvious. High population urban counties, basically the most densely populated county in the biggest metropolitan area in a state. And for each of these, I'm going to give you a comparison between the county GDP per capita number and the statewide, just so you understand the magnitude difference. The theory here is large metro areas, and in particular the densest, most central parts of those metro areas, enable economies of scale for things like efficient transportation, utilities, telecommunications, fiber optic, that just cost a lot more to provide outside of urban contexts. Cities also enable geometrically more powerful network effects, and you could look at that a lot of different ways, but in terms of GDP, I always think of industry clustering and agglomeration, which often happens organically, where companies, suppliers, service providers, and research and training institutions operating in the same economic niche tend to locate near one another. But cities also often have entire economic development strategies built around fostering these kinds of industry clusters. Maybe New York is the best example of the geographic effect I'm talking about, where the GDP per capita of New York County, which is Manhattan, is literally an order of magnitude higher than the counties that represent the 4 other boroughs. So some of this is just central cities are job dense and surrounding counties are more residential heavy. And the other factor I often think about and would love to see some research on, just consider for a moment who are the type of people who stay in declining towns that have poor economic prospects, and who are the type of people who strike out to make a better life for themselves in the city, and how that kind of resorting affects, well, a lot of things, including a place's GDP per capita. And I want to highlight 2 extremely interesting cases. St. Louis, which is an independent city and separated from St. Louis County in 1877. Ironically, St. Louis is considered an urban hellscape, while St. Louis County is home to affluent suburbs and quote-unquote good schools. Make it make sense. And Baltimore, which became politically independent from Baltimore County in 1851 and experienced a very similar history of white flight and disinvestment as St. Louis did in the 20th century, Yet both cities are, respectively, the highest GDP per capita county level units in their states. And by the time we get to the end of this video, I think you're going to find it's not at all obvious that population density should correlate with GDP per capita, and that cities actually have to overcome a lot of built-in disadvantages to perform well on this metric. And St. Louis and Baltimore are definitely in that category, so stay tuned because it gets very interesting. So let's get to the less obvious stuff. Cook County, Illinois, you would think would be in this category of dense urban counties that have the highest GDP per capita in their state. But it doesn't, because in Illinois, the leader is actually DuPage County, still in Chicagoland, but decidedly suburban. It's home to a good chunk of the Illinois Technology and Research Corridor, which certainly sounds like it's going to generate a lot of GDP. And that includes Fermilab, which is fun to look at in Google Earth and is America's particle physics and accelerator laboratory, bringing the world together to solve the mysteries of matter, energy, space, and time since 1967. I actually have spent time in this part of Chicagoland, probably more than I wanted to. But if I have viewers who live in, like, Downers Grove or whatever, let me know down in the comments and give me some recommendations. Otherwise, I'm probably just going to end up at Oak Brook Center, purportedly the largest open-air mall in the US. And I am a huge fan, I just have to question whether they built enough parking. Another category, what I would call college towns, and it's hard to say how much educational institutions themselves contribute to a county's GDP, but these are also research institutions. I believe all of them have big medical centers. I definitely ground truth the Duke Medical Center in Durham. They have highly educated populations, and they have lots of industry clustering around university research specialties. So when I sometimes sing the praises of college towns on this channel, this is also what I'm talking about. And a related category of county, I'm just going to call it government research and see if I can stay out of trouble. So Los Alamos County, which was once completely federally administered and is now an actual county in the state of New Mexico. Still home to the Los Alamos National Laboratory, and apparently notable for having the lowest level of child poverty of any county in the United States. And the other one in this category is Butte County, Idaho, home to the massive Idaho National Laboratory, where I believe nuclear power was first developed, however you feel about that. Okay, the idea here is that each one of these categories is just a little weirder than the one that came before, and I definitely saved the most insane one for last. Before we get there though, I'm not sure I'm even still supposed to be promoting this January 31st thing in New York with the war on cars. It's probably going to say sold out when you click on the link down in the description, but if you're super interested, keep checking back because they've been releasing more tickets from time to time. This next one, I don't even know how to characterize the category, and I don't really know how it generates high GDP, but I'll give you my theories. It's Teton County, Wyoming, and let's just say a lot of very rich people either live in the area around Jackson Hole or they have second homes there. In fact, there's even one source that says Teton County has the highest per capita income of any county in the US, but you could probably get a pretty high per capita number just by spreading Bill Gates' annual investment income among the 23,000 people who live there, let alone all the Hollywood celebs. Anyway, I have to think all that money sloshing around supports a pretty strong tourism and service economy, and somebody has to furnish all those mansions with expensive rugs and high-end kitchen appliances. Okay, here's my last category, and if you came into this thinking, well, GDP in the year 2025 is all about human capital and knowledge work, well, what I'm about to show you is gonna turn all of that on its head. Eureka County, Nevada, GDP per capita over $500,000. It's home to America's largest existing gold mines, so we're going to call this category resource extraction. Alaska, the North Slope Borough, also over $500,000 GDP per capita, home of Alaska's National Petroleum Reserve, a variety of other highly productive oil fields, and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which, well, you get the picture. Okay, now we get to the punchline for this whole video. The top 10 counties in the US for GDP per capita are all in Texas, and they are not urban counties like Harris or Dallas or Travis. I'll let you all try to figure out what the common denominator of these counties is. I'm sure it's a great mystery, but whatever it is, the GDP gets spread among a very low density population. I mean, just for the per capita calculation, the wealth doesn't literally get spread among the county's population. What kind of country do you think this is? But if you really think about it, these are the places that should be generating a high per capita GDP. Tons of land with valuable resources to extract, and few people to spread it among. So a lot of these counties generate over $1 million in GDP per capita. But the runaway winner, and it is not even close, is Loving County, right on the border of New Mexico. Almost $200 million GDP per capita. I don't know, maybe there was some weird accounting thing that happened that year. Now, the denominator in the per capita calculation is 43. But don't be fooled, all kinds of interesting stuff does happen in a county of 43 people. For example, in 2022, Judge Skeet Jones, the top elected official in Loving County, was arrested for stealing livestock, and in that same year, it was discovered that a ranch with 11 registered voters, including the county commissioner, actually has had no inhabitants since 2008. I guess these are the straight shooting, common sense small town values I'm always hearing about. Okay, that was just far too much local color, but that is all I got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for the direct support. I have all kinds of plans for 2025, including on-the-ground coverage of a few cities that I just haven't really talked about much on this channel at all. And I have more in-person events in the works as well, besides New York, so stay tuned. Anyway, keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.